We have an exciting session lined up today on data-driven digital businesses. Let me give you some context to this as well. I think over the last decade or so, and more so over the last few years, we've actually seen a major shift from brick and mortar into digital. Services are changing, new product offerings are coming into play. It's all thanks to digitalization. Data has always been an asset for any organization, but for a digital business, data is a bigger asset. But how do you really leverage on this to drive performance, improve customer experience, and even in some cases, how do you really come up with new business models all centered around this asset that we call data, this asset that ideally should be on the balance sheet. Yes, today we don't put it on the balance sheet, but it is a very, very significant asset which can be leveraged on. And how are we doing it? How are we doing it across the world? How are we doing that in Sri Lanka? I think we have so many questions to ask, and we have a brilliant panel brilliant panel members who have joined this discussion. So let me introduce them. But before that, I'll be the moderator for the session. My name is Yasith. I look at data analytics, digital transformation, and digital economy. And with me, I have Max Métral, who's joining all the way from UK. And let me introduce Max as well before I'd say hi to Max. So Max leads the data analytics function for Formula One. And I think he's been working a lot in the whole sports analytics field, previously part of the City Group, doing quite a few interesting work for Man City and quite a few other football clubs. Hi, Max. Thanks a lot for joining.
Hi, Yasith. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here today.
Thank you. And then we have Mithila joining us. Mithila Somasiri. I think PickMe is a household name in Sri Lanka and one of the largest digital businesses in the country. So we definitely wanted to give the local perspective as well of a digital business. And Mithila comes in with almost 2 decades of experience in the entire technology field and his current role as the CTO, Chief Technology Officer of PickMe. And if you have, I think, some audience, I think, joining from other countries as well, PickMe is essentially playing the field of ride-hailing, food delivery, and lots of other services, essentially making that a super app. Hi, Mithila. How are you doing?
Hi, Yasith. Hi, happy to be part of this session, and I'm quite excited to be here.
Excited to have you, Mithila. And then we have all the way from Madrid, Jose Luis Florez joining us. I think Jose and I go back quite a long way as well. I think, and to introduce Jose, I think it's a big profile, but I'll try to do justice to Jose. Jose was part of setting up Neometrics, a boutique analytics entity based out of Spain, which was later acquired by Accenture, and Jose went on to become the data science leader for Accenture. And from that point, and I think I'd like to say that I think you do this for fun, Jose, that you've been creating AI-driven digital businesses, and you're founded multiple entities, I think, which we'd love to hear quite a lot about. Hi to you, Jose. How are you doing?
Thank you. We're very, very good. So thanks for the invitation. I'm very, very happy to be here with you and expecting to spend a good time with you during the next minutes.
Thank you, Jose. So I think to get the dialogue going, I'd like to start with Max, because Max, I think when you first started at Formula One, I mean, I think we know Formula One as viewers, but Formula One, I think would love to hear the setup of Formula One as well as a business. And when you joined Formula One, I think most of the work, most of the data related things would have been for the more traditional stuff that was being done. But I think you've gone through a transition as well, where now Formula One has become ever more digital than before. So we'd love to hear a little bit about the journey you've taken. I think what sort of places where you've really encountered where for the digital aspect of Formula One that you applied analytics. But I think, Max, just to even get started, I mean, what do you do at Formula One?
No, thank you. I think you summarized pretty well. Pretty massive transformation at F1 here. So I joined F1 back in 2017, so about 4 years ago, just after the takeover by Liberty Media, so a private equity company of the company. And the idea when I joined Little did I know that I was joining a company with little to no data. So funny enough, we only had 2 data sets in the company. One was about partner exposure and the other about TV audiences. There was absolutely nothing about fans. There was no fan database. That was one obviously the first challenge to overcome. So that was quite massive trying to create a database. We had the chance to start from a blank sheet of paper, but that was also obviously a challenge. One of the good things is we didn't have to deal with any legacy system. We didn't have to deal with any legacy people as well, so we could start from scratch. On digital side, we had also a lot to do. Back in 2017, the teams were not allowed to post on social media any F1 content, which obviously made it quite difficult. Our social media channels were only created a few years ago, back to 2016, which is about 8 years after everyone else in the sports industry. So we were starting from a long way back. One of the first things we did was to relaunch our website, our app. We created lots of new different venues in digital, which by now seems obvious, but back then it wasn't. We created podcasts, we created the eSports Championship, we created fantasy, lots of new avenues for us. It helps us grow our social media and digital channels a lot in the past few years. And we also created a new OTT platform. So OTT, for those who may not know, means over the top. So it's the ability for us to monetize and sell directly our rights to the end consumers anywhere in the world, obviously where it's available. And that is called F1 TV. It's obviously a big, massive challenge. And in terms of business model, again, for those who might know F1 in terms of name, but not in terms of business, we operate the sports and we have 3 major revenue channels. So we are about, obviously pre-COVID, COVID has impacted us a lot. Pre-COVID, we're about a $2 billion business in terms of revenue. We generate revenue on 3 main channels, TV rights being the main one, promoters being the entities organizing Grand Prix across the season. And so TV rights, promoters, and sponsorship, obviously massively B2B. And with the new ownership, we are going through more of a B2B2C, direct to consumer type of way. So obviously getting more and more knowledge and insight into who the fans are. And that's obviously helping us in many ways from a B2B and direct to consumer perspective. But that's also why I joined, because back then when we were only B2B, there was a bit less of an interest and less emphasis in terms of data. And now that we're obviously communicating to the millions and millions of fans and trying to get insight and knowledge about who they are and what they want from F1, there's obviously a lot of data to manage.
I mean, what would be, like, let's say, one critical use case that maybe you've taken up? Where, if you don't mind, I mean, maybe even you could take a few minutes, Max, just to explain to us, going a little deep into what was really the challenge you were trying to solve. What sort of data did you use and what is the final outcome? How do you really measure your success in that scenario? Does anything spring to mind immediately?
Yeah, I think I'll give you 2 examples. One, which means that it's very difficult for us to measure our success and impact when it comes to data, is more often than not, we don't have a control group to use in terms of data analysis. For instance, we did some analysis as to when should we start the F1 Grand Prix. So as you may be aware, we have about 20-ish Grand Prix in the season, and we have fans all across the world. And in a normal season, we can have races from the Australia to Japan to Asia to Europe and to the Americas. So it's a bit across the world, which means that when it comes to starting time, there's a lot you can do in terms of if you start at 2 p.m. or 6 p.m. or an evening race. So we did lots of analysis as to how to best optimize the starting time. And we ended up doing a recommendation, which was, let's try to start a bit later, the European races. We did this, but from one season to the other, it's not really like for like. So if you see an increase in TV audiences, can you really take credit for the increase because you delayed the race? Or would we have had that increase anyway because of what's happening on the track, because of having an interesting season? That makes it very challenging for us, because sometimes we're trying to do our best to make actionable recommendations, but after the event, it's very hard to control to what extent we really increased the audiences based on this recommendation only. Another example, which makes it difficult, is when you did in the B2B side of business. For instance, if I try and help our sponsorship team negotiating a sponsorship deal and doing recommendation and pricing strategy, when we sign the deal for however $1 million a year, how much can I take credit for it? And that's very much of like a personal discussion. And that's what makes it very difficult. On the other side, on the type of projects where it's actually a bit easier to manage, on our OTT side, so for us, it's very much like a Netflix or Spotify subscription. You either pay month to month or year to year. We're doing a lot of churn prevention. And obviously, there's a lot we can control and measure. And we are actually a bit more accurate in our measurement as to how much we protect revenue in this field. And lastly, and I'm really interested about the title of this talk about data-driven. One thing that you're trying to do at F1 is actually not to be data-driven, but to be data-informed. And again, giving you one last example on this as to why I personally believe being data-driven can be a bit dangerous, because the data may not always be accurate. You may have some issues either with the representativeness, and I think everyone dealing with COVID right now knows that you cannot really always use the historical data to predict the future, especially when the present is being heavily changing, ever changing in this world. And one example, for instance, of one major success we've had at F1, and that was based on a decision that wasn't really based on data, is Drive to Survive. Drive to Survive is a Netflix series, which has been an immense success. What's very frustrating for me, though, is I have absolutely no data on Drive to Survive because it is on Netflix and Netflix doesn't share anything with me. So we have lots of research information like customer satisfaction surveys and everything telling us how great it is. And we have a rough idea of how many fans we've received from this, but we don't have any exact information as to, from someone who didn't watch F1 before, how much does that increase conception of F1 after watching Drive to Survive, all these things. And at the time, the decision to create Drive to Survive was very much from our MD, Sean Bratches, and our director of TV rights, Ian Holmes, who just had the vision to see that this would be immense for the sports and amazing, but there was not much data to support this idea. So that's why in everything we're trying to do, we're trying to inform decision with data, giving it to the key decision makers, and sometimes being very pushy with our recommendations if we really believe in it, but sometimes being smart enough to know that we may not have all the data to make that decision or to support some decisions, and the data may not always be representative. Obviously, that was lots of small examples to support my arguments.
Thanks a lot, Max. I think quite exciting use cases, as exciting as some of the races. That's the data geek in me talking right now. I think from Max, I'd like to move on to Mithila. So Mithila, you are in charge of all technology and data at PickMe. And essentially, I mean, PickMe is a data-centered organization to give better customer experience as well as to drive internal profitability. So Mithila, would love to hear maybe again one or two use cases that really spring to your mind. And if you wouldn't mind, I think the audience would love to hear about one use case a little in detail. And even if you can tell us how it has actually impacted PickMe as an entity for your profitability, as well as how it has, it depends on, of course, the relevance of the use case. If it has impacted the consumer to enhance the experience, I think that would be a great use case that the audience would love to hear.
All right. Thanks, Yasith. Yeah. So I mean, I think I'm just listening to Max. I think Max, I think we are sort of on the other end of the spectrum where all our channels are digital, and therefore, you know, we have a huge amount of data points coming in, and I mean, at some point that too becomes a challenge as to sort of, you know, now you have this mesh of data. I mean, on average, we generate about 500 million data points a day, and all neatly stored in a electronic format. But then comes the challenge: what do we do with it? Obviously, I mean, so I mean, always our quest is to sort of find ways of using this data so that it helps the bottom line of the business, cost, get more customers, and you know the usual stuff. But we have a particular focus on using this data to improve user experience. I mean, we believe platforms like ours, right? The tech platforms, the key attraction, the key reason why users use us is because it provides a superior experience. It makes life easy, right? I mean, if you look at the experience of hailing a taxi 10 years ago, platforms like us have improved that immensely. So one use case that comes into my mind is at some point, I mean, at early stages, in the game of taxi hailing, one of the very important things is to be able to predict what you call the ETA. Obviously, you have a customer waiting somewhere, you have a taxi, a little away from the customer, could be a few hundred meters, could be a few kilometers. Now, before we do these matching, before we match these taxis to the customers, we need to know, we need to make a guess as to how long would it take, for the taxi to reach the customer. And that's a very crucial decision, and a lot of your experience depends on that. Because if you miscalculate 5 minutes, your taxi will be 5 minutes late. And when you're in a hurry, when you're looking for your mobility, 5 minutes is forever. I mean, that's one thing that I realized after I started working with this domain, that 5 minutes is actually a lot of time. So our predictions has to be very accurate. So I mean, initially, obviously, as we started, we relied on Google, obviously the company that does this at scale, predicting ETS. We all use it on a daily basis. But obviously, as volumes picked up, one of the first triggers was that, hey, it cost us a lot of money, right? While you have all nice, neat APIs, which you can just pass to locations and get ETS, that was costing us a lot of money. So obviously, we looked at the data we had, and we were collecting a lot of movement data, and we asked the question, can we try and do a prediction model, right? So obviously, we looked at available literature, we looked at available tools, and we put something together, and we started benchmarking it, benchmarking it against Google, benchmarking it against actuals that comes up. So we record the prediction. We also keep track of the actuals, and we were doing statistical analysis, and we tuned it over a few months, and then we could actually get to a point where we do it well enough for the business, and we also realized that, in fact, our predictions, the accuracy was most of the time better than Google. Now this surprised, right? This surprised us as to why, how could that be? And then a little bit of investigation revealed that it's because our data set is very local, whereas Google's data set is very it's generalized, right? It's generalized. Our data is very local, and also, if you're familiar with the mobility space here, a lot of trips happens on the tuk, right? In tuk-tuks, not on cars, on tuk-tuks, right? And a tuk-tuk on a road is a slightly different creature than a regular car. I'm sure people who have been on the road, who have driven in Colombo, would relate to what I am trying to express, right? So what we tend to realize is that because our data set is actually very much based on the kind of trips we do, our predictions seems to get better than the predictions that is done by a more generic data set and a generic model. So today all our ETS are predicted by ourselves based on our data, based on our algorithms, and I'm happy to say that they've done pretty well to improve the customer's experience and help our algorithms, matching algorithms, deliver a tuk on time when the customer is in need. So that's I mean one of the obvious things. So obviously that whole effort saved us a lot of money because we don't have to pay Google for the ETA prediction, and that happens. That's a very frequent call, so that was a lot of money, and the outcome in fact was better. Right, we could get better accuracies. So that's one of the use cases. I mean, the other use case that is quite close to us is as we sort of started on our delivery business, food and marketplace. One of the challenges that we realize is that as we onboard a lot of merchants, as we got a lot of outlets on the platform, the discoverability, right, became an essential and important part of the game. You have so much to choose from. How do you? I mean, in fact, when you have too much choice, the sort of the experience sort of started dropping. We sort of the customers kind of get lost in choice. It's a paradox of choice, really. So we sort of soon realized that the systems have to start guiding the customer, to some extent on what to eat, what's for dinner, what's for lunch. So obviously we started with very basic stuff like tagging certain restaurants as featured, as favorites, and so on. So we provide some very basic guiding. I mean, no big data involved there. This is pure sort of operators setting up this stuff. But then gradually, sort of, we started looking at. I mean, as we do, as we did more business, as more data sort of came onto the platform, we started deploying some algorithms to figure out, for an example, if you are in a hurry, if you want something in 30 minutes, what probably would work based on where you are, based on sort of what you have ordered before, what kind of things you would appreciate us bringing to your attention, right? And then that sort of has sort of now expanded into a whole list of use cases. I mean, it's still an ongoing journey. So we have introduced this sort of time-based recommendations based on your past purchases, recommendations based on what people around you have bought in that locality, recommendations based on who has come on board new and sort of has gained traction fast, so that it sounds like someone gaining popularity. So that's another sort of area where we have done some interesting work on big data.
Thanks, Mithila. I think those are two exciting use cases, and I think something I'd like to also maybe share with the audience and leave with the audience, drawing up from what you said. I think contextualizing matters a lot as well. It's not just about taking someone else's model and applying it to you. I think each country, each use case, each scenario, I think, is different. And I think the tuk-tuk example was I thought was very fascinating, and something that I think the audience would find equally fascinating. So Mithila and Max, I think moving away from the two of you, I think you have applied analytics, data science to your organizations, different organizations, of course. But I think Jose, I'd like maybe for you to put on the hat of a founder. You have founded multiple digital entities. And I think with you, it's not, I think, just using data for a digital entity. Probably data would have been an integral part of it, even at the point of coming up with the business model. So if you wouldn't mind, Jose, we can take one of the entities as an example and share with everyone a little bit of context about the entity, and what sort of mindset did you have at that point when you came up with the business model, which was completely centered around data? And from that point, from concept to implementation, what sort of work did you do to really leverage on data and give a better consumer experience as well as drive profitability?
Okay. Well, I think there is not a simple rule. So I think probably it's more valuable if I share some of my experiences, because probably each one of them is different if you compare with the others, and probably they are different if you start a new venture in the next months or in the next years. There are probably some common aspects. Uh, when I started with Neometrics, that was a consulting company, we were working in Spain, Latin America, and in the US. Since 2003 till 2012, when was acquired by Accenture, as you said. Uh, uh, in this time, thinking in more than 10 years ago, uh, we can focus our strategy in trying to concentrate talent, meaning that probably if you think in this last decade was possible not to have enough talent in your company to say, well, my market share in terms of talent, if I'm thinking in having the best people working in machine learning applied to marketing or applied to any specific aspect, was possible, no? At least having perhaps 10% of the highest talented people in your region, no? But this strategy is not possible today, because there are a lot of talent is spread. The need you require in terms of your requirements in terms of specialization are much deeper, no? So this is a strategy that cannot be possible today. At least I see it as being really very difficult, no? So we have to change, no? In 2003, Neometrics was based in trying to acquire a lot of talent and be differential because of that. Now I'm leading a new venture in collaboration with Indra. That is a very big. Indra is a very big company. It's 50,000 people working in IT. It's the most important company in this area in Spain and also in Latin America. And when they asked me to create something new in AI in terms of consultant, well, of course, it's not possible to create a new metrics. It's not possible to try to have this big amount of talent internally. But what is possible is create something very open. It's possible to create an ecosystem. No? Then in this case, the approach was very different. Is if I have a conversation with a client and I understand the pain points and I understand what are the solutions they are requiring. Perhaps I don't have the deep experience on this specific topic that the client requires, but I can go to the market, and I can go to specialists in the US, in Russia, in any other countries where they have been working exactly the same. No? So it's a different way to create talent. No? So when we want to create a new solution for a client, we have a conversation, we identify the pain points, we identify the technology, we identify the methodologies, we identify the kind of experience that is required, and we go to the market to find this specialized profile. So it's very different. No? In these two business models, the main element is how you gather the talent. In the past, it was possible to do internally. I think now you have to go to a much open ecosystem, a much more open environment in order to do that. No? In some other cases, the way you create a new business model has to do with, as you said, perhaps with data, but not only with data, but also with the kind of usage you give to this data. No? And let me use a couple of examples about this. Also 10 years ago, we started with a concept that at those times was quite new, and it was the social network analysis. Not social network from the perspective of Facebook or Twitter or so. They are obviously social networks, but I mean from a mathematical point of view. Okay, you have huge graphs with a lot of nodes, with interconnections among these nodes. These nodes can represent people, can represent vehicles, can represent an article in a newspaper. So you can associate with this concept any kind of entity, and the connection can be a semantic connection, can be an interaction among different actors in the graph, can be a rumor that this is spreading on the society, fake news. Fake news, for instance, is another very good example of this kind of things. And we tried to say, well, for the very first time, we're able not only to storage information about very huge graphs, but we also are able to simulate the behaviors of this graph, to identify the specific roles of each one of these nodes in the social graph. We can identify the influencers. We can identify, according with the content they are they're spreading, what's the pattern, what's the dynamics, what are the dynamics of this behavior. And then we start creating products based on this capability. Basically for marketing purposes, because we discovered that, for instance, when you were going to figure out, to try to discover, to predict the clients who were going to leave your company, and you were a telco operator, for instance, this influential behavior was extremely valuable, and it was not so easy. And I'd say that probably in many cases it's not possible, no, to make this kind of predictions if you go to a traditional approach using historical information and anything else. No, it's quite funny also how in time things evolve. No, because currently with all the COVID thing and so, this kind of models of spread that are not epidemiologic models but sociological models have been very, very successful to understand the evolution of the disease and how to identify the transmission chains and how to manage. No? So things can be applied for different topics in different times, but this was another example. No? So in this case, the products based on data that we put on the market were based in a specific analysis capability. Let's say it this way. No? So all the different products for different industries and for different purposes, fraud detection, risk management, and so were based in this approach. Okay? This is another example of how to create something that is new and you can differentiate in the market. Another example is it's a company called Touchvie, where in this case we thought, well, advertising is changing, and the way we consume entertainment is changing a lot, and television is changing dramatically. No, you only have to see Netflix and Amazon and these new ways to enjoy the content. No, so we said, well, people needs to interact with the content. The old times when people was passive, witnessing something that was happening on the screen, and then the advertisement block, and so it's over. No, so the same way you decide what to watch in the TV, we think it would be great if you were able to interact with this content. And interacting with the content means that you were able to identify the people, the locations, the clothes they are wearing on the screen, the electronic devices they're using, all these different pieces of information, in order first to give you information about what you're watching. Give me the name of this actor, or give me information about where I can buy this suit, for instance. Okay, and then once you have all this information, you can integrate on one side a contextual advertising experience, and second, you can introduce e-commerce capabilities, and you can say, well, I like this, so I watch, I click, and then I buy. No, so this is another area. No, so in this case, what you are proposing is using technology. In this case, we have to use speech recognition. We have to use computer vision, very advanced computer vision, to identify all these elements in the content. We have to synchronize the signal, because this can happen in pre-recorded content as a Netflix movie, but it can also work in a broadcasting emission. No, so it's extremely important in order to create a new experience, and from this new experience, what the publisher acquires is not only the possibility to have new revenue streams because of advertising or because of e-commerce. They have bulk of information about the taste and the preferences of the audience. So the audience is something that you start to know in a one-to-one level. This guy is more interested in history. This guy is more interested in fashion, in travels, in gastronomy. Well, so you can start creating something really very, very, very powerful based on the interaction and based on the user experience. No? And well, these are some examples. No? So basically what we try to do is first identify what we do or what businesses are doing and they can do better. This is one thing. Or second, and this is more innovative and probably more exciting too, is trying to identify opportunities to create new businesses. And I mentioned one example, but there are many of these, no? So we can discuss later. Okay.
Thanks a lot, Jose. I think those are some great examples, especially the one you mentioned on I think capturing images and then directly connecting the consumer with e-commerce. I think these are examples we would have never thought of, about 10 years ago, but now with the amount of data we have, the infrastructure we have, and the power of analytics and AI, I think they've all opened up completely new business models and revenue streams. So thanks a lot for sharing all that with us, Jose. I'd like to start another round of discussions, and I'll start this with Max. So Max, I think you did discuss, I think, what you have done over the past, going from certain traditional things into digital side of Formula One. So looking ahead, I think it's going to be more and more digital for Formula One going forward. How you're going to interact with your consumer, being more and more B2C. So looking ahead, Max, what sort of applications of data are you looking at? You might not be doing that today, but I think you might have some great use cases that are lined up, or even at very conceptual stage. And in that entire roadmap, what sort of challenges do you foresee across technology, people, and data itself?
Yeah, I think in terms of opportunities, before talking about challenges, I'm very excited about knowing more and more about our fans, especially more on an emotional level. I think the idea is, obviously, you're trying to gather more and more behaviors. I think that's what I find the most interesting. All the social demographic information, I think, is not always interesting in terms of modeling. I don't think age should be a factor in what you're going to do. I think it should be a layer that you put on top of whatever analysis you're trying to do. For instance, putting age and gender in some kind of clustering model that you're trying to do, I think is a bit useless. I think it's better to do a behavioral segmentation and then layering it onto whatever social demographic information you might have. So going deeper into the behaviors, which for us is quite challenging because we don't always own all the data. For instance, that may sound surprising, but we don't control the Grand Prix by themselves. So we sell the rights for a promoter, which might be a city, a country, or a private entity, to organize an F1 Grand Prix, which means that they are the ones monetizing the tickets and selling tickets, which means that we don't own the ticketing in the Grand Prix, which means that there is a lot of data that we are oblivious and that we don't even know exactly who are going to the Grand Prix. So trying to get a bit more ownership of this and trying to get better understanding is obviously very important. But when you put things into perspectives, you have about 4 to 5 million people going to Grand Prix every year, and we have about 500 million, if not more, fans in the world. So that's less than 1%. So it's like managing all this. So gathering more and more data, going more into the emotional level. We're trying to do a lot of things in terms of research. In order, for instance, to measure what makes an F1 Grand Prix entertaining. It's super subjective. It's very hard to put objectivity into this type of data. So for instance, we do active and passive measuring. So active, we do ask fans in lots of different ways and contextual things in different ways. What do they think of a Grand Prix, either live during the Grand Prix, after the Grand Prix? What are the expectations? That's active. And I do a lot of passive measurement, either through monitoring social media posts, for instance, either on Twitter or Reddit forums, for instance, where fans just talk openly about what did they enjoy about the Grand Prix, and correlating this data live during a Grand Prix with what's happening on the track. And then you can do some interesting things, such as obviously understanding like text and how people talk, emotional sentiments of the race, how emotionally they're involved when there is an overtake, when there is the FIA putting like a penalty, a seconds penalty to a driver. So that we're doing to a lot of this. What I'm really excited about, though, is obviously F1 TV for us is massive. and monetizing our content directly to the consumer and having lots of data that what people watch. We're doing a lot as well as in terms of improving the fan experience on TV. So we work with AWS in terms to add some layers of information to the fans, predicting some things on the track, and how many laps Max Verstappen is going to catch up to Lewis Hamilton, how easy, how difficult will an overtake be. We're doing a lot in order to increase the fan engagement, so we're doing a lot on this. In terms of challenges, I think the difficulty is for us, we're being seen as being a massive entity, and on the exterior, you believe that F1 is a lot of people. From the inside, we're very much like a 70-year-old startup. We don't have that many people. We don't have that crazy budgets. So whoever contacts me after the talk, we don't have massive budget, guys. I think that's a massive, not the issue, but it's just a challenge that we have to cope with on the everyday basis. My team is actually super small. And the way we work, I think there's, no positives and negatives, just the way it is, that I always have to decide on whichever data analytics projects, do we have the means to do internally? Is it strategic enough for us to do it directly, or should we outsource? So we're trying to do a bit of both. When the data is either too sensitive, for instance, doing a pricing model on TV rights or sponsorship, we'd rather do it ourselves. We can't really afford to give that data to anyone, even with NDA and everything. So we do this internally. For instance, we do image recognition work in order to identify sponsors' logos on the screen. And that data technically can be seen by anyone on TV. So we're happy to work with the supplier on this. Also because it goes into a bit more advanced modeling that maybe we don't want to spend the time developing, and we are happy to use whatever is best in the market or whoever is doing it the best in terms of suppliers. So that's one of the challenges that you have to cope with internally, is that mix. And I think one of all the challenges using data on the B2B level, which is obviously very difficult because you have less data points and you have less occurrences to analyze, so small sample sizes, so you're more likely prone to make some errors. This is one of the challenges for us as well. So going in ever increasing market as well, and I'm not even mentioning any COVID challenge because it's less data related, but a lot of challenges as well.
Thanks, Max. I think you're doing some great work going from transactional to actually building relationships with consumers, I think. And I think more and more data that you have, I think that'll help you with that, with the transition and for you to actually build those relationships. You did mention a few challenges, but I think one thing you did mention, I think the lack of resources, or you being, I think, a relatively small entity than what we perceive you to be. But I think the good news is at least the whole data leadership is in good hands.
Thank you.
And so I think you should be able to overcome most of the challenges, Max. So moving from Max, I'd like to go to Mithila. And Mithila, I'm sorry, but I'm going to put you on the spot a little here. And also a little similar to what Max said. Yes, you guys are also doing a lot of personalization. You have lots of data points about your end consumer. Now, with all that, yes, you do have the opportunity to improve the customer experience. But at the same time, it has to be done in an ethical way. And also, I think given the state of data protection in the country, there's a new bill which will get passed also. So either with the bill in place or without, I think still data protection is a big element. So how do you really look at data protection? Just purely from ethical side and also as a regulation. And for you, is that a big headache? I mean, is that getting in the way of what I would call data monetization? Mithila, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, no, not really. I mean, data protection and privacy concerns are always sort of at the top of our mind. I mean, we do something very simple to make sure that sort of, we play, completely ethical in this game. That is that we don't really collect your personal data per se. I mean, for most of our use cases, we don't have to know you as Yasith, right? Obviously, now our business have a number of users and different types of users. Now, obviously, if you are a driver partner for us, or in fact, if you are a merchant partner, we do know a little bit about you. We have to, because you know that's an essential part of the service we provide. But that's a small cohort of customers. Our customers, you know, people who use us, who get our service, we know very little, or we almost collect no personal information. You can register with us as an individual customer, start hailing taxis or buying food just by giving us your mobile number. That's all we need, right? That's all we collect, really, right? Obviously, you can provide a little more details so that, you know, we can sort of, I mean, if you need email receipts, you can, you know, set up your email, but that's not really required, right? So I think one of the first, one of the important things that we consciously do is to make sure that we don't collect data that we don't really need. I guess that is sort of, you know, the first principles in data protection. Now, most of the use cases that I spoke about, right? If you open the app from, I know, Colombo 4, right, to tell you, you know, what probably is, you know, popular in the area, we don't really have to know you as Yasith, right? And if you are a returning user, if you're a recurring user, right, we know you as a token, right? We can probably know that, yeah, it's a guy who bought from us yesterday that is trying to buy today, right? But again, you know, we don't associate you with any of your personal profiles. Now, could we improve our use cases if we can know a little more about you? Of course, yes, right? But again, you know, more data we collect, you know, more obligations on data protection, the more gray the privacy concerns gonna be, right? So we're quite conscious, and our broad approach is to say that only collect what you absolutely need.
Thanks, Mithila. I think that's a great remark to really round off that comment. I think just collect what you need. I think it becomes a less of a headache as well for you, who's responsible for eventual customer, consumer, personal data. So moving from Mithila, I think, to Jose now, you did mention, I think you did go into detail about one business you really centered around data. And I think, Jose, you might be also thinking, even right now, I mean, as you speak, you might be thinking of other business models as well, what you could potentially take up as new ventures. So when you really put that hat on to come up with a new business model, to what level do you really think about who owns this data and what are some of the regulations you might have to comply with? Because if a business is heavily dependent on data, the entire business model is dependent, then some of the regulations what may come in could actually heavily impact you. One purely from a data protection side, and even maybe on going forward, I think on AI regulatory side. So how do you balance the two when you really put that hat on to come up with a new business model?
Well, of course, you have to adapt to the regulation, and I think it's not a problem at all. In fact, you can transform this into an opportunity. Again, a couple of examples of this. There is a big controversy with the facial recognition systems. No, the massive capability to identify when one person without the acceptance, no, of this identification. No? Potentially, from a technical perspective, this is something that is possible. No? Then, if you read the news, you can find probably every week you can find a case of a shop of a store that has installed this kind of systems able to identify people, and it's extremely controversial. No? But at the same time, it's an opportunity. I mean that if you create a system, and I'm talking now about technology, not specifically about AI. If you create a system that makes the following thing, And the following thing is, you're able to say if one person belongs to a certain set of people. Huh? You are a terrorist, or you are an employee. No? So you have you define a set, and you say, yes, he belongs to this group. And once you belong to this group, I'm able to identify you. Okay. But if you don't belong to this set, then I cannot know anything about you. And it is something that we can protect by design. If you do that from a technical perspective using blockchain and some other technologies, then you have transformed a limitation into an opportunity, because your product, if it's respectful with this identification, then has a competitive advantage. No? And I think that's the way to think about this kind of solutions. This is one example. Let me share another example of opportunity. I think that the personal data, the data about the citizens' behavior, should belong to the citizen, and not to Google and others. And that's my point of view. That's my philosophy. And I think this is the philosophy who is going to have a prevalence in the forthcoming years. Okay. Let us think in a platform. Let us think, for instance, in the recommendation engine from Netflix, for instance. Everyone knows how Netflix works and how it's a recommender system. The recommender system from Netflix is a classical one, and is very biased by the content provided by Netflix. So I can recommend you similar content, but this is biased by the content you have watched before in my platform, because I don't have information about what you have done in other platforms. Okay? I think it's much better if you think in recommendation in a more general approach. I want to know your preferences in terms of movies. And for me, it's very informative to know what you do in my platform, in Netflix, but it's also very informative to know what you do in other platforms, or what you have done in the past, or what you watched, and what did you think about this and this and these movies, independently if these movies are in my catalog, in my portfolio, or are not. Okay. The way to know more about you, the way to interact, to ask you about this movie or versus this other movie, this actor, this actress, and so, is through conversations. And these conversations can happen independently of one specific platform. And the intelligence that you're able to create based on these conversations, using an avatar based on an intelligent agent, is something that, in my opinion, should be, let's say, a pod belonging to the citizen, to the consumer. And you can go with this pod to one platform, to other platform, to other platform, but the data, and not only the data, the intelligence or the recommendations that you can provide based on these are created because of your information and belongs to you as a citizen. So what I try to say in this couple of examples is, of course, there are regulatory limitations. Of course, we have to be concerned by the ownership of the data. But even thinking on that, you can find that there are very good business opportunities to transform, to create something much more fair.
Thanks, Jose. I think that's a very refreshing perspective on things. And I think would have loved to go a little deep into this discussion because the intersection, I think, it's something of intersection of data protection, AI regulation, and the use of data. I think it's a very interesting topic, and it's something that should be debated, I think, over a good couple of hours. But in the interest of time, I think there are about 3-4 minutes, and we have a few questions coming in on people side and infrastructure side. So let me try to cover as much as we can, and I'll throw it out to the entire panel. So if maybe one person could just take about a minute to comment on this. One question we are seeing is on the infrastructure side. How expensive is data infrastructure? So obviously it's a very, very subjective question, but if you could maybe not make it too subjective, but what you have really seen over the past few years in terms of data infrastructure costs, and what are some of the trends you see, that sort of insights would be great for the audience, but in a very, very short span of time. So if one person could take about a minute and comment.
I can take very quickly. I think we are not really dealing with big data as much as Mithila is or Jose has been in the past, because we don't have that millions and millions of data points getting every day. It's quite cheap. I think it can be very cheap when you start, and you don't have to be afraid of this. I think the more important cost is not really about the software and this infrastructure, it's about the people. I think that'd be my very short answer. I'm sure Mithila might have another point of view, and Jose too.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Max. I think it's getting cheaper every day. I mean, if you look at all the leading cloud providers, the data infrastructure costs is on decline because of the competition and the advancements of new toolkits that's coming. It's becoming efficient, it's becoming faster, it's becoming cheaper. So I don't think the infra cost should be an inhibitor for any business to sort of get on the data world. But as you said, talent could be a bigger impediment. I mean, that I think is an area where we need more experts, more people who are capable of using these toolkits, who are capable of really sort of setting them up for productive applications. That's becoming a scarce resource.
Well, I have a slightly different perspective, depending on the use case, of course. No, I think the majority of the big data use cases can be solved with existing computing capabilities, and the cost is reducing dramatically. Okay, but there are also cases I'm thinking in cases where you require deep learning for computer vision or for linguistic analysis, and so. And in this case, when you, for instance, are providing to a big network of stores, are providing surveillance systems based on video, or a behavioral analysis based on video cameras, and so, then the inference servers you require can have an impact in terms of capex. It means that requiring investment. So the same way, it's important to ensure the accuracy of the computer vision models you apply. It's also very important to ensure that they can work with limited hardware, no? Because if not, the cost can rise quite high. Even that is reducing very, very quickly, yeah? but it can have an impact, of course.
Thanks, Jose. I think that's all the time we have for this discussion, because we do have a hard stop right now to continue to the next session. But Max, Jose, Mithila, I think it's been a very engaging discussion, great thoughts, and exciting times, I think, for the three of you lined up, being experts in the field of data and analytics. So I wish you all the very best, and thank you once again for joining the session.